So on in this world, there are religious traditions which have some philosophical background to them, which I have explained earlier. So we need all these different religious traditions with different philosophical ideas because people are different with different mental predispositions. And each of these different religions can help different people in different ways accordingly. So, for example, even within Buddhism, the Buddha himself taught, because of the different predispositions amongst his disciples, the Buddha gave teaching accordingly. And because the teachings he gave were more suitable for the different disciples. And so the different religious traditions in the world, which have these different philosophical backgrounds, are in their own ways helpful to different people, their followers. I'm a Buddhist, but I cannot, I will never say that everyone has to follow Buddhism. Although philosophically there are differences between these different traditions, but the main practice comes down to the practice of love, compassion, and so forth. Of course, it's up to the individuals to whether they want to follow a certain religious tradition or not. But once you follow a religion, you have to be sincere followers of the different traditions that you are following. So the unique feature of Buddhism is the teaching on dependently arisen things, dependent origination. Even the non-theistic, non-Buddhist traditions do assert a self, permanent self or soul theory. Of course, they do assert causality, which we experience, but the experiencer, the person, is seen as something permanent, autonomous entity. Whereas Buddhism says everything, the things that we actually enjoy, we use, come through causes and conditions, and ourselves as the experiencers are also come about through causes and conditions. And so Buddhism's main unique teaching is the causality, through causes and effect. As Nagarjuna says, this dependent origination, the profound teaching of dependent origination is the treasure of Buddhism. So with regard to the dependent origination, there are two different levels of understanding it. In the lower philosophical schools within Buddhism, they mainly focus on the dependent origination in terms of causality, whereas the Madhyamakas, the middle way school, says nothing exists truly, but they exist by way of imputation or designation. And therefore, the Madhyamakas teach the dependent origination in terms of designation, designated dependence. In Chandarakshita has written this Tatov Samgraha, which is a text on epistemology. And then a commentary to that text was written by Kamalashila, in which Kamalashila says by understanding the law of causality, the dependent origination in terms of causality, then based on that understanding, one actually engages in the right practices which gives rise to higher realms of existence, rebirth in higher realms. And by understanding the designated, dependence correctly, with valid cognition, with that certitude, one will be able to reach liberation by overcoming the self-grasping. And Nagarjuna says in the Ratnavali, there are twofold. Our goal is twofold. One is the higher realms, higher rebirth, and then the other is the ultimate goal of definite goodness or liberation. So the definite goodness, meaning liberation, is our final goal. And in order to reach that, we have to understand the dependent origination of things. So this is philosophically talking. But on the other hand, with regard to the practice or the conduct, Buddhism teaches. Buddhism is a religion which has in its root the practice of compassion. Now, the object of compassion, to whom you feel compassionate, is not only human beings, but all kinds of sentient beings, animals, and others. So we don't make this kind of called discrimination between humans and animals and so forth. But because everyone, each and every sentient being, do not want suffering but want happiness, which is common to all, therefore we are talking about cultivating compassion to all sentient beings, which is a very broad scope that we are talking about. So the compassion is this wish for others not to have suffering. And as long as you have this attitude towards others, you will not harm others. So as long as you have this concern towards others, not to have suffering but to have happiness, then you will not think of harming them. And therefore, based on the understanding of dependent relationship, the Buddhism teaches the practice of non-violence or non-harm, within which there is there are two levels. One is just restraining harming others. So that's the first level of the practice of non-violence or non-harming. And the second level is not only restraining harming others, but actually helping them. So with the compassionate attitude, when you wish to help others, there is this special resolve. Of course, you will not be able to all of a sudden be able to take the responsibility on your shoulder to lead out others out of suffering. In order for that to happen, that kind of courageous motivation to happen, you have to have wisdom. So you have to be able to understand that ignorance is something which can be put an end to, and thereby you'll be able to understand the reality as it is. So with that understanding of reality, then you will be able to when you see that the suffering and the cause, the ignorance, are something which you can put an end to, then of course you'll be able to see the validity of taking the responsibility of helping others out of suffering as well. So there you need this reasoning and wisdom. So Buddhism teaches, on the one hand, the philosophical view of interdependence, within which there is the causality. Based on the understanding of law of causality, you create causes for higher rebirth. And then through the understanding of dependence in terms of designation, then you understand the reality of things, which goes against our fundamental ignorance or grasping at an independent self. So with that insight into the selflessness of things, then you will be able to see that all the defilements that are within oneself can be put an end to. There's this possibility, and therefore you'll be able to also think that all sentient beings, other sentient beings who have defilements, can also put an end to the defilements within themselves, and therefore you can think of actually leading others to liberation. So within the practice of compassion, non-violence, there are two levels: restraining from harming, and then restraining harming others, and then actually going out to help others as well. After becoming enlightened, the Buddha turned 3 wheels of Dharma. The first one is the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, which is popularly, which was given popularly, and therefore it's historically recorded. So the teaching or the sutra on the Four Noble Truths teaches the path to liberation for oneself. And then we have the tradition of the Vinaya, which is also called the Pratimoksha, or individual liberation. Within this practice, you think of becoming liberated for oneself. So this teaching was given popularly by the Buddha. But then the Buddha also gave teachings which focused mainly on becoming a fully enlightened person, a Buddha. So for that, Buddha gave the teaching on the perfection of wisdom sutras. So this was not given popularly, but to very few disciples who had very pure karma. And so in Heart Sutra, which we usually recite, it says, the Heart Sutra, in there we find that there is discussion between Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara. And so when the Buddha gave Mahayana these kind of teachings, there were other bodhisattvas, the 8 main disciples, and then gods, goddesses, and so forth. And so it was not known popularly that Mahayana was taught by the Buddha, because there's no real historical record popularly. So Mahayana was there. The argument that Mahayana was not a teaching of the Buddha was even there during the time of Nagarjuna. In Wensik's commentary, which is a commentary on Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, he talks about the parents of Maitreya. So it seems perhaps they could be two Maitreyas, one as a godly being, and then another being a human person. So Mensik mentions parents of Maitreya. So he says the mother's name had this name Maitri, and therefore the son was also named after her. So So there seems to be different accounts about these beings, I mean the bodhisattvas and so forth. In any way, Maitreya's text, the 5 treatises, which mainly the Sutra Alamkara, which teaches, which explains the teaching of Mahayana. And so he uses the term Mahayana a lot. And the first chapter is actually on arguing for Mahayana being the teaching of the Buddha. And then also Bhaviveka has written this, the essence of Madhyamaka, and its auto commentary, Tarkajvala, or Blaze of Reasoning. There's lots of arguments, very detailed arguments for Mahayana being the teaching of the Buddha. And so there were other scholars also. So the argument that Mahayana was not taught by the Buddha was not something that came later, but evolved later, but it was there in those times, in the old times as well. If you were to say that Mahayana teachings are not the Buddha's teaching, then and if you go into the texts or the works of Nagarjuna and his disciples and others, and then you find them really deep. And then there are other teachers also who have really done, written very profound teachings, texts. If Mahayana was not taught by the Buddha, then you would have to say that it was actually taught by other masters of India, which would have, by which you would also have to, by default, you would also have to say that those masters like Nagarjuna and so forth were greater than the Buddha himself. So it's not so inconvenient to say such things. And also with regard to the system of the path that are given only in the Pali traditions, of course, there you could find inconsistencies in certain teachings. And so, of course, within the scriptures, I mean, there are certain scriptures which teach something, but which may not be the ultimate aim of the teacher himself. But if you use logic and reasoning, then you would have to say that the Nagarjuna and all these great masters really didn't have their real source in the Buddha. So I usually sometimes jokingly say that the later historians who related the history of Buddhism, I mean, of course, came much later, but Nagarjuna lived much earlier than them, and so he was much closer to the Buddha's time. And then Nagarjuna was, of course, an Indian, and so the Indian history would be known better by an Indian person rather than others who would rather try to infer things from here and there using different accounts. But Nagarjuna, on the one hand, was not someone who is rather stupid, a dull person, which is not actually true if you look at the writings of Nagarjuna himself. They were really marvelous. He was a really marvelous logician. He didn't only know Buddhism, Buddhist philosophy, but also, if you look I have heard that the Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna in Sanskrit is a really called beautiful writing. And then he also knew medicine. He also knew alchemy, um, making gold by using gold, making elixirs. So he was also an artist. So he cannot be someone who would just say things um, without understanding well. So Nagarjuna and Viveka and these great masters actually checked the teaching of the Buddha through reasoning, logic. And so they must have checked whether Mahayana Buddhism was actually taught by the Buddha himself or not, really thoroughly. And so they have said the Mahayana teachings are the teaching of the Buddha. And so we could actually, because they were logicians, not just following something blindly, and we could also take them to be authoritative for us. And then, with regard to Tantra, there are people who say it's not Buddhism, teaching of the Buddha. Of course, even within the Hindu traditions, they also have these tantric practices, the yantra practices, and also the fire puja, rituals, and also the mystic heat meditation or on the inner heat, and also using the inner energy, prana energy, in their meditation. The bindus and so forth that are in the body. And so people people argue that these practices are, because these are found also in Hinduism, these are not teachings of the Buddha. But authentic Indian masters like Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Nagabodhi, and Chandrakirti, who have written tantric texts, and also Chandarakshita, who came to Tibet in the 8th century, also wrote, I've seen some texts in the Tanjur's collection on Tantra by Chandarakshita, and also George Adisha came to Tibet. He wrote the path, lamp on the path to enlightenment, in which he also mentions that Buddhist tantras. So he accepted that Buddhism has tantra. And so I usually tell this story. There was an Indian Sanskrit scholar, a great Sanskrit scholar named Upadhyaya. Once he went to Nepal to do some research, and then while he was doing his research, he found a palm leaf, a single palm leaf folio on which are written some text. And when he read that, perhaps the text was the Aryadeva's text, which is called the purification of the defilements of the mind. But because he found only one single folio with the text written on it in Sanskrit, there was no mention of the author on that single folio. But when he read the Sanskrit on the palm leaf, he found that the style of writing was actually same as the style of writing which is found on the 400 verses of Aryadeva, which is a commentary or supplement text to Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom. So Aryadeva touches more on the practice, the conduct aspect of the bodhisattvas as a commentary to Nagarjuna's Mulya Madhyamaka Karika. So Upadhyaya said the style of writing on that single palm leaf that he found in Nepal was the same person who wrote the 400 verses. So, therefore, he said, it is, therefore, he concluded that Ayadeva, who wrote the 400 verses, had actually written this tantric text. So so there is, and then some other Sanskrit scholars have told me that Chandrakirti's style of writing in his Madhyamaka Avatara and then the text written on, it's called Pradhipo Utyotthana, the bright lamp, which also had the same style of writing as other texts by Chandrakirti. And so they say they were written by the same person. And then in the Tibetan society, we have, of course, stories about authentic, true practitioners who have had real, true experiences of. Some of them I have actually met, and when they meditated, of course, they could have very special experiences, and as well as having visions of deities, special their meditational deities. And so, regarding the Buddhist Tantra, the teaching of Buddhist Tantra, if you really think carefully with an unbiased mind, I mean, we cannot say that the teaching of the Buddha can only be limited to what we can actually have access to as very ordinary persons. So in Tibetan Buddhism, we have as external practice the Pratimoksha discipline, the Vinaya, and then internally we have the Bodhisattva practices, the practice of the Bodhisattva path, and then on top of that we have the sacred Tantrayana based on the meditation or visualization of deities, and then also using the prana and the bindu energies that are within ourselves in our meditation. And so Tibetan Buddhism is a type of Buddhism which has all these elements of Buddhism in its entirety. So, in order to explain Buddhism in this entire set of Buddha's teachings complete, we have the Kanjur texts, and then as commentary to them, the Tenjurs. And there you will see something. There's really something special in these teachings, and then mainly you have to practice them and to be able to experience the teachings within yourself. And so this is about an introduction to the Buddhism that has spread to Tibet. Then in Tibetan tradition, we have the Nyingma tradition, and then the Kadamba, Sakya, and the Kagyu, and then the new Kadamba tradition or Gelug tradition, and then we also have the Chonang tradition, as well as the Shijepa, the tradition of the pacification. In other words, we have the 8 chariot traditions, which all come from the Nalanda tradition. So having actually experience of the basic teachings, then if you add on top of that the tantric practices, of course there are slight differences between these Tibetan Buddhist traditions. Kagyupas have their origin or source in Naropa, such as the practice of the 6 yogas of Naropa and so forth, and the 6 yogas of Niguma and so forth. And then the Sakya tradition have their source in the Birwapa, and then they have the practices of the Lamde, the path and the result, and then those of the three visions and so forth. And then Nyingma have their source in Guru Padma Sambhava, and in the Nyingma tradition, they teach the 9 yanas, and the ninth yana, the Ati Yoga, and is a practice of using the primordial or pristine awareness in the path. And then in the Kadamba tradition, we have the practice following the Jo Atisha, based on his teachings on the lamp for the path of enlightenment. And then there is the Lamrim's tradition, which is based or has its source in the Prajaparamita study of Prajaparamita and the Madhyamaka traditions. And so what are taught in the Prajaparamita text and the Madhyamaka text are together brought into the Lamrim text. And on top of that, then we add the tantric practice. So Lama Tsongkhapa's tradition of Geluk or Gedenpa, also follows the Kadam tradition. And so if you really look at these teachings broadly, then you'll be able to see then how they actually come together. You should not just be satisfied with partial understanding and of the traditions. And so we'll go through the text. So Jerambuche wrote the three principal aspects of the path. And Jerambuche had a disciple, Tsako Wampo Ngawang Thakpa. And then after having studied under Jerambuche or Lama Tsongkhapa, he finally went to the eastern part of Tibet in Gyalrong, and then gave teachings to people. So he spread the teaching of the tradition of Lama Tsongkhapa in that area. So he wrote a letter to Lama Tsongkhapa to give a short teaching. And so in reply to that request, Lama Tsongkhapa wrote the three principal aspects of the path. And at the end, he said, he says, my son, you should try to achieve the final goal. And then in one of the miscellaneous texts written by Lama Tsongkhapa, Lama Tsongkhapa's to Saku Wampo Ngawang Thakpa, who His Holiness says he had forgotten that the teaching was actually to be on this text by Tsongkhapa, Destiny Fulfilled. And so in this text called The Three Principal Aspects of the Path, Lama Tsongkhapa touches on the means to achieve liberation and So the destiny fulfilled has no the reading transmission, but not explanatory transmission lineage. I received this from Dr. Rinpoche when I was a child, and from Chijang Rinpoche I received the reading transmission of the entire works of Lama Tsongkhapa. So for a Gelug practitioner, the tradition of Gelug started with Je Tsongkhapa. So let's have tea. What I was trying to say was that we have to take the example of Lama Tsongkhapa himself. So regarding his own life story, Lama Tsongkhapa says, in this particular text, he says, I have in the beginning sought much learning, and in the middle I've had the teachings have dawned to me as instructions, spiritual instructions, and then in the end I practiced it day and night, and then I all dedicated this merit for the spread of the teaching. So whatever he studied, he actually gave thought to them, and then the teachings actually dawned to him as instructions, spiritual instructions. And because of having gained certainty about the teaching of the Buddha, and then he finally dedicated himself in practice of the teaching. And so the text actually goes through how Lama Tsongkhapa himself engaged in the study of the teaching of Buddha. The eyes for the world to see higher realms of life and freedom of enlightenment, resting for this. Those tired, resting place for those tired, wandering on the path of existence, the root of happiness and excellence, my gurus, and so forth. And then second stanza. Third stanza. Verse number 4. In order to live a life, we talk about, having this in profession, so which comes through education as well. So we have to live our life through education. So if that is the case, then in order to reach the highest goal of enlightenment, the lasting happiness, what needs is there to talk about studying. In order to become professional, you first begin with the study in the kindergarten stage, and then go upwards. I mean, progress further and further, go and finally become trained well and become professionals. So, similarly, to become a Buddha, we have to actually make change within our mind, without which there's no way you can become a Buddha. So, with regard to this internal transformation, we have no experience so far. And so, if you wish to make this change within, then you have to do so through educating yourself by studying the teachings. Verse number 5. So, regarding the teachings of the 6 ornaments and the 2 supreme ones, as well as others, Tsongkhapa says he actually studied all these classics written by Indian masters, as well as treatises written by great Tibetan masters. So he, of course, studied under great masters like Lhotra Drupjin, Namkha Gyaltsen, and so Tsongkhapa himself studied under many great teachers at that time. So he says, therefore, not content with the partial or superficial understanding of the treatises of the invincible Lord of Dharma, or Ajita, and those of the great sages of the 6 ornaments and 2 supreme ones, I studied them all in great detail. So he was not content with just partial understanding of text or study of texts, but he actually studied so many texts. If you study, for example, the Mula Madhyamaka Karika by Nagarjuna, in order to understand it thoroughly well, you have to know the Chittamatra view, which can be done through studying Chittamatra texts written by Asanga and so forth. And in order to understand these as well, you actually need to study the logic and epistemology. I mean, texts on logic and epistemology. In order to actually understand our own position well, you also have to know the non-Buddhist traditions. So you have to know where the non-Buddhists are inconsistent in their logically inconsistent, and so you have to have this vast knowledge. So that is about not being partial in your study, not having partial learning, and then also superficial understanding. Refers to the fact that you have to understand the import of each and every word, I mean, thoroughly. And then verse number 6, especially for an ordinary person, the sole way to determine the precise reality of things are the treatises on relative reasoning. So with much effort I studied with difficult points again and again. So he's saying it's important to do analysis through logic and reasoning, by using dialectical reasoning. Number 7. Though I toiled in the treatises of Sutra and Tantra, when practicing and expounding their profound meaning, I found my view had not advanced far beyond those who had not learned nothing and who knew even less. And so, within the context of this Sutrayana, of course, you need the investigative mind in order to develop insight, special insight. Now, if you are not able to use the analysis correctly, Then, of course, merely sitting down there and do some meditation will not really lead you to have insight. So Tsongkhapa says that dialectical reasoning that distinguishes the profound, especially the treatise of Nagarjuna, and resolves all his doubts completely. Verse number 9. 10 and 11. 12 read. So there are people who say that there are special features of Tantrayana, but not just being satisfied with the hearsay, but actually Lama Tsongkhapa is saying he actually studied them thoroughly. Verse number 13. 14. Verse 15. Number 16. So in order to understand the unique feature of highest Yoga Tantra, you have to know the features of the three lower tantras, and therefore Tsongkhapa says he studied these three lower tantras thoroughly. Number 17, within the fourth class of Tantra, the highest Yoga Tantra, I studied the root and explanatory tantras and others, renowned as the sun and moon among the Indian sages, the secret community of Father Tantra and the Yogini Tantras of Vajra, Vajra and Samvara and so forth. I also studied the Wheel of Time, unique amongst Tantras, an original system of explanation different from the other sutras and Tantras, along with its illuminating exegesis, the stainless light. Thinking this over, how well my destiny is fulfilled. Thank you very much, noble Manjushri. So Tsongkhapa is saying he thoroughly studied well. I mean, he studied really well all these highest Yoga Tantra texts as well. So that's the end of first chapter. Number 19 now. Then, with a firm, intense, and enduring faith in Manjushri, supreme in banishing the darkness from the disciple's mind, I prayed in order that all scriptures might dawn as spiritual instructions and strove to fulfill all the necessary conditions. Thinking this over and so forth. Then number 20, striving thus, I found a special conviction in the stage of the path of enlightenment transmitted from Nagarjuna as Sangha, and hence the perfection of wisdom. The best of scriptures profound, dawned upon as spiritual instruction. And thinking this over, thank you, sir. 21. In this northern land, there are many, regardless of whether they have studied the text on epistemology or not, who say there is no graduated practice of the path leading to enlightenment in the compendium of valid cognition, Pramana Samuchaya, and the corpus of 7 treatises. But they also take as authoritative the permission granted by Manjushri to Dignaka when he explicitly said, write this book, in the future it will become the eye for the wandering beings. And 23, 24, 25. So, having studied the text on Panchaparamita, having studied them, then Lama Tsongkhapa also studied the Lamrim tradition, through which he could understand the the implicit teaching of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, which are the stages of the path, and then also he studied the epistemology in verses In verse 23, there is mention of Pramana Samuchaya and Pramana Siddhi, or Pramana Vartika texts, which are written by Tignakar and Dharma Kirti. Lama Tsongkhapa is saying that he studied them. And so in this verse, he says, seeing this to be completely illogical, I especially looked into this and found the Pramana Samuchaya's opening homage is established by the Pramana Siddhi chapter through the forward and reverse logical procedures as proving Bhagwan Buddha to be an authoritative master for those seeking liberation. From this, I found a deep conviction that his teaching alone is the ford for those seeking total freedom. As such, all essential points gathered as one of the parts of the two vehicles unfolded through the path of reasoning, and I found a special joy. And so then verse number 26 mentions the study of Bodhisattva level and ornament of sutras written by Maitreya and Asanga, the first one by Asanga. And then on verse number 27, relying especially on the compendium of practices, which grants certainty on all the points of path with its graded arrangement of the vast and profound teaching, I saw clearly the many points of the supreme treatises of Nagarjuna, such as compendium of sutras, as stages of the practice. Thinking this over, thank you very much. Then relying on the Buddha Goya's well-explained practical instructions on the Dhyanathara, the Virachana Visambodhi, all the points of the paths drawn well as spiritual instructions, thinking this over and so forth. Then number 29. 31. The ultimate of all well-spoken teachings of the mighty sage is the glorious highest Yoga Tantra, of which the greatest and most profound is the king of Tantra's glorious Guya Samaja. On this, the supreme philosopher Nagarjuna said, the essentials of the path are sealed in the root tantra by the 6 limits and 4 ways, and thus they must be understood through the master's instruction following explanatory tantras. Acknowledging this was crucial, I acquainted myself for a long time with even the smallest text of the noble Nagarjuna's tradition of the Guya Samaja, the ultimate core instructions contained in the concise sadhana, the lamp of integrated practices and stages of presentation. Verse number 34, also read. In the 18 volumes of text written by Master Tsongkhapa, there are at least 5 volumes of them are dedicated to Guya Samaja. So that was his main, what he studied mainly. This is actually true because if you really understand how the parts are presented in the Guya Samaja, then you will be able to actually untie the knots of the teachings that are given in the other tantras. So this also helps in untying the knots or the difficult points to understand in the Dzogchen practice and tradition as well. So this is really crucial, Guya Samaja. Verse number 35, through this, the essential points of many tantras, such as Samvara, Kalachakra, dawn upon me in spiritual instructions. I have explained these elsewhere. Here, I just show a door for the discerning, thinking this over, how well my destiny is full. Thank you very much, Noble Lord Manjushri. So second chapter finish, which shows that for the actual, the Lama Tsongkhapa actually going into the practice of the teachings. Verse number 36, having so Lama Tsongkhapa in his daily life did meditation in connection with related to Madhyamaka, and also did his yoga practice of, and thereby experiencing the bliss and the emptiness. And then he actually completed the generation stage practice, and then reached the stage of mind isolation of the Guya Samaja Yoga Tantra. And then at the time of death, he was able to use the subtle minds, the innate clear light, using his own experience at the time of death, and thereby being able to meet the son clear light with the mother clear light, and thereby he was able to go through the rest of the practices of Tantra at the time of death, achieving the illusory body and so forth. So that's what is referred by verse number 36 and then 37. It is said that again, just like prayers of bodhisattvas are all contained within the prayers to uphold the holy dharma. Thus, whatever virtue I accumulated was dedicated to the spread of the sage's teaching. Verse number 38. In order to increase my own virtue enormously and to show properly the correct way to the many fortunate beings who possess a discerning mind, I have written this account of my education or realization. So, having studied the teachings and then also reflected on the meaning of them and finally applying them in one's meditation, and one has to follow this procedure correctly in order to gain experience. So this is what Lama Tsongkhapa did. It says, by the store of virtue attained through this process, may all beings through this same procedure maintain the unexcelled conduct of the Buddha and enter the path that pleases the victorious ones. So you should read this text and go through this text and then follow your study according to how Lama Tsongkhapa had done it. The next His Holiness is going to teach on the three principal aspects of the path, which I'm afraid I don't have the text. So in the Lamrim tradition, of course, one has to So Dalai Rinpoche came up to remind His Holiness that the other text was supposed to be these 8 verses on mind training, and when Dalai Rinpoche actually asked me which teachings I was going to give, it was a very hectic time, so I had really forgotten His Holiness says. And the next text is the 8 verses of mind training, which teaches the cultivation of bodhicitta, this altruistic attitude to become Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so this is a kind of the summary kind of Shantideva's Bodhicharya Avatar, Bodhisattvacharya Avatar. So I received teaching on this one from Jabji Tijang Rinpoche. So this was written by a student, follower of Sharava, who was student of Potowa, who was in turn so Geshe Langri Thangpa was a student of Chekawa, who was in turn a student of Sharawa, who was a student of Potowa, and sorry, His Holiness says he got mixed up. So when Langri Thangpa was living, Sharawa was also a contemporary of him, and so they were known as the duo of Langshar, Langri Thangpa and Shara. In other words, Langri Thangpa was a student of the Kadam tradition, which started with Atisha down through Dromtempa. So here, with the practice, it says, with the determination to achieve the highest aim for the benefit of all sentient beings, which who surpass even the wish-fulfilling gem, may I hold them dear at all times. So here you are not looking down upon others when you, of course, practice compassion. You're not feeling pity at others, thinking about their suffering, but actually you're thinking of helping them out of suffering, and thereby cultivating bodhicitta. So as we talked this morning, the mind, our conceptual mind, is able to see things rather exclusively from others. And we see good things in some things, and then we want to take them or emulate them. And then we also think of the bad side of the things and become sometimes rather discouraged. But in verse number 2, you are not trying to actually go before anyone else, before others, but actually it's talking about holding yourself humbly, thinking yourself to be lower to others, in order to actually bring others to the state of enlightenment. If you look at an insect, for example, of course the insect doesn't know anything about what is good or bad, like right and wrong. So an insect is really ignorant about what to adopt and what to reject, but we know what causes, what can lead us to discipline our mind, and how to cultivate what are the undisciplined states of mind and all this. But even while we know these things, we, of course, we are humans, born as humans, and as a bhikshu. You can actually feel yourself higher than the insect, and then feel like proud. But instead of doing that, you actually look at yourself as lower. You can actually look at yourself as being lower than even an insect, for the greater purpose. In all my deeds, verse number 3, why we face all kinds of shortcomings and difficulties or obstacles is because of self-cherishing attitude, and also the grasping at independently existent self. So afflictive thoughts and emotions are those experiences which, no sooner they arise in our minds, cause our minds to lose its peace. So here, the verse number 3 is teaching us to actually confront the negative thoughts and emotions that arise in us as soon as they arise in us, and try to confront them and overcome, not letting them gain an upper hand over us. So it says, may I strongly confront them and avert them. Verse number 4. When I see beings unpleasant character or pressed by strong negativity and suffering, may I hold them dear, for they are rare to find, as if I have discovered a jewel treasure. So when you see people who are really suffering, either because of a lack of provisions or sickness and so forth, and like sicknesses, for example, AIDS patients, I mean, you should not discriminate them and look down upon them. Of course, you should be critical of their bad behaviors, but while doing that, you should also be give them hopes and opportunity. If you push them outside of our society, then there's no opportunity for the person to do something, and therefore this verse is saying that teaching us to hold them dear. Verse number 5. When others, out of jealousy, treat me wrongly with abuse, slander, and scorn, may I take upon myself the defeat and offer the others the victory. So when we, of course, out of jealousy and out of thought of competition and so forth, people can cause harm to us. But of course, their action is wrong, and you may have reason to become angry, but someone who is practicing a bodhisattva path or cultivating a bodhicitta should not be give way to anger. But as it says, you have to take upon yourself the defeat and offer to others the victory, because the practice of bodhicitta is to overcome this self-cherishing attitude that are within us. So when someone does something bad to us, of course you feel hurt, and your self-cherishing attitude also gets hurt. So rather than trying to confront them, if you actually take it on, accept their harm, which actually harms this self-cherishing, I mean, it would be better to take upon yourself the defeat and give the victory to the others. So if you think and if you recite this verse and think about it, I mean, it will be really helpful. Although in the beginning you may not be able to accept the others' harm to you, thinking that, oh, this person is doing this to me. Like, instead of thinking like that, you'll be able to help yourself to reduce your anger and pride and so forth. And so it will be really helpful. When someone whom I have helped or in whom I have placed great hope mistreat me in extremely hurtful ways, may I regard him still as my precious teacher. So not only those, I mean, when someone whom you have really helped does does something which is, I mean, really ungrateful of the person and to you, when even such things happen, you have to hold them dear. So they have to be seen as precious teachers, as it is taught in Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatara. Your enemy is your teacher. So you have to practice patience or tolerance. And so that opportunity to practice patience is given by your enemy, and therefore the enemy becomes your teacher in that sense. So we don't become angry with Buddha or Nagarjuna, or we don't become angry with our near and dear ones, but we become angry with our adversaries. So, and then, because we need to practice patience, and therefore the opportunity to do that is given by the enemy, the adversaries, and therefore they are like our teacher to practice patience. In brief, may I offer my benefit and joy to all mothers, or my mothers, both directly and indirectly. May I quietly take upon myself all hurts and pains of my mothers. So this shows the practice of Tonglen, giving and taking. So you take in the suffering, misfortunes of others upon yourself, and then whatever virtues you have, the positive energies that you have created, you actually give it to others. So this can help you not feel tired of working for others as well. So this verse number 8 is missing. So it's talking about overcoming the 8 worldly concerns, such as not being able to meet with things that you want and meeting with things that you don't want, and fame against defame, gain against loss, and so forth. So whatever we do, we should not let ourselves under the sway of the 8 worldly concerns, the mundane concerns. So this happens because of lack of concern for others. And on the other hand, also you also think of having fame and gain and praise and so forth to yourself. And therefore, as I said this morning, the more you're able to reduce the strength of this self-grasping, it will also help to reduce these 8 worldly concerns. And then with regards to cherishing others over oneself, this is some kind of aspiration. Whereas self-grasping or grasping at a true independent self is a kind of a diluted intelligence. And you have some kind of pseudo-certainty about the reality of things with this kind of mind. And so because of that, it cannot be overcome with the aspiration like compassion and cherishing others over oneself. And therefore, this kind of ignorance has to be overcome through understanding that reality of things, which is the selflessness. So the practice of the method, such as cherishing others over oneself, are in order to overcome this grasping at a self, which has to be done through realizing selflessness. So what happens to us usually is that whatever appears to us seem to have some kind of independent, solid existence. But instead, if we could see that they are mere illusion, like illusion, then so the last 2 lines say that by understanding everything as like illusion, with that mind, without clinging, may I be freed from the bondage. So this teaching on the 8 verses of mind training is finished, and now next is going to teach the 3 principal aspects of the path. So continuing from where he saw in his left earlier, Tsako Wömbung Awan Thakpa have received a letter. Lama Tsongkhapa also wrote a letter to Tsako Wömbung Awan Thakpa, for whom he wrote this particular text that is going to teach. In the letter, Tsongkhapa says that follow my instructions properly and correctly, and then when I become enlightened, a Buddha, I will share the nectar of my teaching first with you. Do you hear the Russians?
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. Good. Not this. Oh, yeah. That's a dish. Just on the sing the dish. And then,
so, Tsongkhapa says, practice correctly and properly the teachings that I've given in this. And then when I become a Buddha in the future, I will share the first nectar of my teaching with you. So it shows how close Lama Tsongkhapa felt about Sakon Bongawan Thakpa with him. So the text goes, I pay homage to the venerable gurus. So Jechun Lama Namla Chotselo is the Tibetan. So this shows, of course, within the context of Lamrim practice, it shows the devotion to Guru, the reliance on Guru. So the term Je shows that that the Lama has the quality of having developed the practices or experience pertaining to beings with small capacity. Is not preoccupied with the mundane concerns for this, which you have to do only with this life alone. And then Zun, nobility, refers to the path shared with the shared path with those of the beings with medium scope. So, which is to say that the practitioner, the Lama, is able to actually see the whole of samsara as being in the nature of suffering. And so, and then Lama refers to the Lama having this quality of the developed path pertaining to the beings with highest scope. So, which have to do with the training on the path, which leads to the highest goal of enlightenment, Buddhahood. So, there's nothing greater than bodhicitta. So, someone who has who's really sharp-witted, of course, before developing bodhicitta, can of course develop the insight into emptiness through this wisdom. And in order for that wisdom, of course, to become a cause for Buddhahood, I mean, it has to be complemented and by bodhicitta. And so bodhicitta is the cause which can bring happiness for us, the lasting, long-term, and short-term both. So from the time you have experience of genuine bodhicitta within yourself, then whatever you do becomes a source for happiness for others and also a cause for becoming Buddha. So even while you are in samsara, you will be really happy and full of joy. It's like the peacocks running in the forest of poisons. Everything rather appears to you as being source of happiness with bodhicitta. So such a person, a Lama, has someone who has this kind of the experience of genuine bodhicitta and has also the instructions of to cultivate bodhicitta. And so the term, the plural term, refers to the teachers of Lama Tsongkhapa himself, beginning with Chögyet Döndrup Rinchen, and then he, under whom he, of course, may have memorized different prayers and texts, and then Chögyet Döndrup Rinchen also instructed Lama Tsongkhapa to study this and that text, and so actually, it was. These are given in what the instructions of Chögyet Döndrup Rinchen as to how Lama Tsongkhapa should follow his study curriculum can be found in the biography of Lama Tsongkhapa written by Khedrubje. And so he came later in his teenage. He came to the central part of Tibet and then met so many other lamas under whom he studied different treatises, and particularly he studied with Manjushri, relating with Manjushri as if he was relating with a human person. And so these, all of these masters are referred to by this plural term, gurus. And so you have to first gain certainty about the teaching by relying on gurus, and then also gain experience of the teachings being nurtured by an experienced master. So you have to have a qualified master. You don't need lamas who look for wealth, power. So such a person is not neither a lord nor a noble person. So someone sitting on a high throne doesn't make him a qualified lama. So you have to know the qualifications of a true spiritual masters. Of course, there are more and more people, the increasing number of people are taking interest in Buddhism, and especially among educated people. And then at such a time, there are opportunists whose only goal is to accumulate more money and wealth, and also having relationship with women and so forth. So there are charlatans like that. In Tibet, I also hear that there are people who there are such charlatans. I've heard from some Chinese. Somebody told me that these days some Tibetans come to China, proper China, and selling guidebooks to go to Sukhavati, the Sukhavati land, the pure land of Amitabha. So it's sad. So in Kalmykia and Buryatia in the Russian Federation, you may also meet with people who come to sell you the guidebooks for Shambhala. Benchen Balden Yeshe has, of course, written a guide to Shambhala. So what I'm referring to is, people coming to you with some letters saying that this is a guide to Shambhala, and then, with a seal on it and signature on it. So I met, about 20 years ago, I met a Chinese from mainland China who told me that Tibetans come to proper China and claiming to be Dharma Rajas, king of Dharmas. And then the Chinese devotees, of course, went to them and made offerings. But when they really checked well, at close look, that what these Dharma Rajas had come for is actually sex with women. And so he said, what I can do to curb such things. And I said to him that I cannot do much about this, but you have to first know the qualifications of a true spiritual teacher, as it is given according to the Vinaya system, and also according to the sutra system, regarding which there is the 10 qualifications of a spiritual guru given in Sutra Alamkara by Maitreya. And so you have to check whether these persons who come as Dharmarajas qualify, or these qualifications are not. And before actually regarding taking the person to be your guru, you have to check them. And of course, you may regard them as your friends in the Dharma. And so you have to really check by understanding these qualifications of teachers and examine them well. So even in our text mentioned that before two persons, decide to regard one another as disciple and guru, and you have to, in certain tantric texts, it's even said that you have to examine each other for 12 years. So this is really important to examine the people who come claiming as teachers. And so the essence of all the teachings of the Buddha, the pathway of the bodhisattvas, and praised by the bodhisattvas, and then the entryway of, or the ford of the fortunate beings. I shall explain them as well as I can. As Tsongkhapa says in his praise for dependent origination, there is no teaching of the Buddha which doesn't finally lead to the liberation. And therefore, the teachings of the Buddha can be summarized into 3 points, which actually draw you towards liberation, or the understanding of reality, and those actually flow into it, and those teachings which actually will land you there. And so the main teaching of the Buddha, the import of the teaching of all the teachings of the Buddha, is to lead us to liberation. And therefore, that's the essence of the teaching of the Buddhas. And then the path praised by the bodhisattvas, I just explained them. And then the pathway, or the ford of for the fortunate ones, is the teaching of the understanding of emptiness. And then Tsongkhapa says, I shall explain them as well as I can. I mean, all these vast teachings of the Buddha in very few words. In other words, he's saying he's going to explain them. So those who are not attached to the pleasures of samsara, those who strive to make this life of humans as meaningful, and those who wish to, and those who rely on the path which pleases the Buddhas, these fortunate ones, please listen with a clear mind. So this shows how to make this life a meaningful one. So, which is to say that you should study the entire teaching of the Buddha. So, having understood the entire teaching of the Buddha, and then when you actually practice them without actually confusing the order, and without confusing the number of practices, Without having the basis of the general teaching of the Buddha, of course, you cannot just jump to higher experiences. Of course, there may be people who really have very good imprint of the teachings from the past lives, and for them there are, of course, cases where they can have experience of the teachings quite rather without much effort in this life because of their acquaintance with the experience and teachings from the past. But this is very rare. It's almost like called next to impossible. For example, the teachings of which are called Doha teachings, the spiritual songs, the extemporaneous kind of spiritual songs, such as Saraha's Doha, and in which there are mentions of the instant in its enlightenment and then gradual enlightenment. So those who have a very good imprint from the past life, who can be led to experiences called, they may be given teachings very specific to them, which can actually spur them on the path. Other than that, for general audience disciples, the gradual path should be used. Otherwise, the path which is meant for the instant enlightenment or beings who have the capacity for experiences rather easily through certain very terse teachings, if those are used for those who need gradual progression, then it could be turned like a poison. So you should have the understanding of the entire structure of the teaching of the Buddha. And then, having all the necessary practices together, then you can, of course, go into higher practices. So this verse, so these fortunate ones, please listen carefully or listen with a pure heart. And so here, Lama Tsongkhapa is directly talking to, was not directly talking to Thakur Umpo Ngawang Thakpa, for whom he wrote this text. And then, of course, indirectly, he is also talking to others who follow his instruction. And then the next verse, so with regards to the reason why you need to cultivate renunciation, he says, without renunciation, those who are preoccupied with the pleasures of samsara, there's no way they can actually pacify their defilements. And because of our craving to the samsaric pleasures, we are bound in samsara, and therefore first cultivate renunciation. So what you have to think about is suffering. Of course, within suffering, there is suffering of suffering, the painful experiences that are obvious to us as being suffering, and then the changeable suffering of change, and then the pervasive conditioning existential suffering. And so when we talk about overcoming suffering, or the Buddha saying, you have to understand suffering. What he means is the third type of suffering, this deeper suffering of the conditioning and pervasive conditioning existence. Because the other two, the first kind of suffering, are something which even the animals are aware as being unwanted, and then the second type of suffering are those which even the non-Buddhist tradition, followers of non-Buddhist traditions also are aware of something unwanted for them. And so here we are talking about overcoming the third type of suffering. In order to for that, you have to overcome the delusions within ourselves. Because when we talk about liberation, we are talking about total freedom from these the afflictive thoughts and emotions that are within us. And so you have to understand that by when we talk about liberation, it's not some kind of a place that we reach, but it's a quality that you actually gain within your mind. So these the afflictive thoughts and emotions, I mean, cannot just go away, but we have to develop the antidote against them and overcome them completely. So renunciation here is not just called wishing to be free from the painful sufferings, the suffering of suffering, nor it's not the kind of the freedom from the suffering of change, which even the non-Buddhists also try to develop, which is to say that in the non-Buddhist tradition, what they look for is higher rebirth into in the higher realms of existence, the concentration and the realms and so forth, and which is what we are not looking for. So therefore, without this pure renunciation, we cannot overcome. We cannot actually reach the pacified state of liberation, and therefore he says these we are the embodied beings are bound in samsara because of craving. So even the pleasures or the blissful experiences of higher realms of existence, such as the concentration realms and the formless realms, are still within this conditioning, pervasive existential suffering, and so they are not free from this kind of suffering, and therefore this line is actually pointing to that. Even if you have some degree of absorption, meditative absorption, you are still not free from this pervasive suffering. And the next it says, by familiarizing yourself with the thought of how difficult it is to find this kind of human life and how rare it is to find such a thing, and that there is no time to lose, you try to overcome the preoccupation with this life. And so thinking about the rarity and the difficulty of finding this precious human life, and then thinking that there's no time to lose, you cultivate the thought of not being preoccupied with the pleasures of this life. And then next it talks about if when you think over and over again about the infallibility of the cause and the karmic causality, and also think about the suffering of samsara, this whole cycle of existence, and it will help you to overcome the preoccupation with the pleasures of the next life as well. And so in this verse, Lama Tsongkhapa is basically touching on the four ways of turning away from samsara. So even in the Darwinian theory, with regard to the external world, and how things have evolved over time. Similarly, in Buddhism, we are talking about how to evolve. So the external world comes about through causes and conditions, and when certain causes and conditions come together, and then they give rise to certain effects with certain dimensions and called aspects and so forth. And then when we go down to the subtle particles, I mean, how they interact between each other and how they come together, I mean, they form different entities. And then in Buddhism also, we also talk about space particle. And this was there before, even before Big Bang happened. And so, as this space particle became more and more coarser, then we have all these other elements. So when we talk about elements, we are actually talking about a very subtle level of these energies. And so when as they interact with each other, they form different things. So what this points to is that of the working of causality. In Shantideva's ninth chapter of Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, he talks about the color, the smell, and taste, and so forth of lotus have their own different conditions. So he says the causes which have given rise to the color, the shape, and smell and taste of lotus comes from its own cause and conditions. And then he goes on to say this beginningless suffering and happiness, the experiences that we have come from our karma. So he makes this distinction between the external inanimate things, how they come about through causes, their own causes and conditions, which in turn come from a previous cause and conditions, whereas sentient beings have pleasure and pain and pleasure because of our karma. So our body, of course, may have some connection with the evolutionary process. So the subtle particles that are within our body may be because of nature. But these particles come together and then becomes a basis for the experience of suffering and pain and pleasure. So that has to do with the karma. So here when Tsongkhapa says the infallibility of karma, he's pointing to, of course, le or karma means action. When you talk about action, when you say some action, when you talk about an action, it kind of shows there is some motivation behind it. And because of that motivation, the actor kind of acted out, and therefore you have the action. In the inanimate objects, of course, there is no such motivation. Of course, our karma may have some contribution, may serve as some kind of a contributing factor for the external objects as well. But generally, the rocks and soil and so forth have their own causes and conditions. And then, of course, the different systems of the world and the places and where people and sentient beings live may have to do also with some karma. Maybe they have to do with very subtle karma. And so, when you think about the infallibility of karma, as long as there is this karma within us, which leads us to rebirth, and also we have this clinging to the self, and then we will have the effect, undergo or experience the effect of these karmas. And therefore, as long as you are still bound in samsara, even though you may have gained a human life, what we need is to go out of this samsara as a whole, which are the product of our delusions or afflicted thoughts and emotions and karma. So, as long as you're not able to overcome the defilements, the negative thoughts and emotions that are within us, there is no way we can go out of samsara. So here, Tsongkhapa doesn't particularly mention the samsaric suffering of samsara as such. But this is kind of referred in a verse later. So where he says, we are driven by these four powerful currents. So here, the four currents could be understood to mean birth, aging, sickness, and death. So these flow, continuously in us, and so we are, carried by these four rivers. Mainly because of our karma, which are, it says, which are difficult to undo. We are bound, tightly bound by this rope of the karma, difficult to undo. So it's like we are totally bound by this rope, that we are even not able to move our hands. If our and then on top of that, of course, even if we are bound by the rope, and our limbs, the hands and legs are rather free, we can do something to untie the rope, but then that's not the case with us. We are totally bound by it. And then not only that, we are also bound or confined in this cage, the iron cage of grasping at a self. And so we are rather helpless to do anything. So we have this notion of an independently existing self, a person, because of also having this grasping at an independently existing psychophysical aggregate as well. So this leads to the grasping at a self. So, and then next line says, we are totally enshrouded by this dense darkness of ignorance. And because of which we think that things are as they appear to us. And so everything around us appear to have some kind of independent existence. And then we cling to such a way of existence of things. And therefore, you can see how we are enshrouded by this darkness of ignorance. And so we have no way to actually go out of this samsara, if you think. And therefore, what we need to do is to eliminate this ignorance, and then overcome the grasping at a self, and through that to overcome to avert creating karmas for suffering. And so next line after the ignorance, it says, if you think how all these mother sentient beings are continuously tormented by these three types of suffering in this endless birth in samsara. So the three sufferings are finally rooted in our karma, which in turn is created because of our holding on to some kind of independent existence of a person, physical and psychophysical aggregates, which in turn leads to see ourselves as having some kind of independent existence. And so this verse could be used to generate or cultivate for the true renunciation. And so this is how, by using this particular verse, we can actually generate the thought to go out of samsara, the suffering of samsara. So when you are able to have this, the feeling that you actually want to go out of samsara, and day in and day out, when you think of actually wanting to overcome these the negative thoughts and emotions within ourselves, then that's when you actually experience this the true renunciation. So of course we have this notion of things having some solid existence, but if you really think carefully, at a closer look, you find that there is no such solidity in the things. And so with that understanding, of course, you will be able to have some kind of simulated experience of renunciation. And then you further carry on with your examination, and see that the self-grasping is not actually an intrinsic nature of the mind, and therefore the nature of the mind itself, the basic mind itself, is not tainted by the defilements, and therefore you can see how the defilements that are in our mind can actually be overcome, and therefore see the possibility of reaching enlightenment or liberation. So first you study, and then you give thought to it, you come to suspect about or have some doubt about it, and then you further investigate, and then you find some certitude, and then you develop a simulated experience, and then when you push further, you have genuine experience of renunciation. And then if you have the understanding of emptiness, of course, when you develop further and further, you come to the point of developing the understanding or insight, deep penetrative insight into emptiness, where you completely absorb your mind in emptiness, which is to say, to reach that of the path of seeing of an Arya beings. And so next, when after renunciation, Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to teach on bodhicitta. So within bodhicitta also you can explain it in terms of the reason why you need to cultivate it, and then the actual the identity or the nature of it, and then when you actually develop the measure of having actually developed bodhicitta, like those of that of renunciation. So you think about uh, wishing all sentient beings without exception to be free from suffering, and then you think that may I be able to do that, you will be able to shoulder the responsibility to help them out of samsara, and then which is that of the great compassion. So when you have great compassion, it doesn't only mean that you wish others to be out of suffering, but actually you want to take the responsibility of liberating them out of suffering. That you go to that kind of extent of your courage. So in order for this thing to happen, to have this great compassion, you have to be able to hold other sentient beings who are suffering and for whom you want them to be out of suffering. You have to hold them dear and cherish them. And then, in order to, when you say if the sentient beings could be out of suffering, you have to understand what suffering means. And so you have to understand what suffering actually means. And for that, we have already talked about in connection with cultivation of renunciation. And then you develop the wish, the principles of equalizing and exchanging self with others. So all sentient beings, within this context, all sentient beings have been your mother, your parents, and so forth. And so they are all kind to you. And so the sentient beings have been your mother and other relatives. And so you think about their kindness, how kind they have been. And then after that, you wish to, you also develop the wish to repay the kindness. And in order to do that, then you develop love, compassion, and extraordinary resolve. And finally, through that, you develop the bodhicitta, which has the true attributes of intent or aspirations. So after having shown the measure of having developed the renunciation, Lama Tsongkhapa goes on to say that if that renunciation is not complemented by bodhicitta, then it will not become the called the perfect course for the Buddhahood, the highest enlightenment. And therefore, the intelligent ones should develop this. And then the means of developing it is the verse that we already covered, except that it has to be now switched to developing the compassion and so forth. Of course, for us, given our own condition, there's no way, if we think carefully, that we can help countless sentient beings out of suffering, while we are also in the same boat as them. But then, from our own side, of course, if the Buddha were here, then he would be able to show whatever path and practices are necessary, needed for the different individuals. Because he himself has, the Buddha himself has actually gone through those practices and experienced them, and he is able to see exactly what is needed for different individuals. But for us, we are struck with actually helping others. So when you become a Buddha, it doesn't mean that the rest of the sentient beings also will become Buddhas, but from the on the part of the enlightened being, he has all the capacity to help sentient beings according to their needs, exactly as the according to their mental disposition and so forth. But it also needs some karmic connection with the Buddhas as well. And so, regarding ourselves, we would have, of course, people and other beings who may have some karmic connections with us. For example, in the case of the bodhisattva named Sadapararudita, I mean, he had visions of all different kinds of, so many Buddhas. And then he also received prophecies from all these Buddhas. I mean, of course, those Buddhas could have helped him, but then what they said to him was that your karmic connection, you have karmic connection, special karmic connection with the Bodhisattva Dharmuttara. And so they sent him to Dharmuttara to receive teachings. So, as you develop the experience within yourself, I mean, you'll be able to help others more and more. So, if you can think in this way, then of course you will be able to see how, I mean, it's indispensable for one to become a Buddha in order to help others limitlessly. And so when you have the genuine sense of wishing to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings, that experience kind of spontaneously happens in you. At that point, you have the true experience of bodhicitta. Now, in order to reach enlightenment, the Buddha also taught the 6 perfections. So the understanding of emptiness, in order to become an antidote to our ignorance completely, so that you become enlightened, you need those of the other perfections. So, in order for for example, the generosity, to become a perfection of generosity, I mean, you have to have this attitude or the experience where you don't feel anything that you would want to like to give to be dear to you. You don't feel a sense of loss when you give something at all, whatsoever. But that has to happen also with the help of bodhicitta. And so, the 6 perfections, in order to become true practices of perfection, of course, have to be complemented by bodhicitta. So what we need to focus mainly on is the perfection of wisdom, to cut the root of ignorance. But even while we are not, we have not entered the path of Mahayana, we need to do analysis and examination of how things actually exist, and to understand, at least to have some understanding of the emptiness. So Aryadeva has said in the 400 verses that someone who is doubts about the teaching of the Buddha has to actually give thought to teaching on emptiness. And likewise, Dharmakirti says, because the Buddha is not ignorant about the main practices, the rest of the teachings should be inferred from this. And so, to reach enlightenment, you have to have the understanding of emptiness. And so, as said earlier, you're understanding the causality, law of causality, you can create the causes for higher rebirth, and then understanding emptiness or selflessness or dependent origination in a subtle way, you lead yourself to liberation. And then, of course, you will also be able to feel certain that there is a possibility for someone to overcome the two types of obscurations: the obscuration to knowledge or cognitive obscuration, and the afflictive obscurations. So you, of course, have to develop the samadhi, and then with the help of that, you develop vipassana. And so through this kind of practice, you have the method part of the practices, and with the help of the practice of generosity and so forth, and the called compassion and so forth, you develop the concentration, and with the help of that, you develop wisdom. And so tomorrow we'll have the preliminary process of the initiation of Chakrasamvara, the Gandhapada tradition, the 5 deity Chakrasamvara or Heruka of the Gandhapada tradition. And then I will touch on the before the preliminary process of initiation, we'll have the rest of the teaching on this text by Tsongkhapa. The preliminary process should not take long, but in case we are not able to finish this text, we'll do it in the afternoon perhaps. And tomorrow is the death anniversary of Lama Tsongkhapa, and so we'll do a talk offering as well. Deda dengyo chi nyenro tamche tado tongba tan shen rusamba kana sushu ba deda kunge myolam drup gyur chi yewe chin labda dende luwa mebe tenba tan dagel hasam tawe tudop ki membe tungun de la nyun drup sho